Welcome, whoever you are, wherever you are, to our time of shared worship today. It's great to be together. Today we're listening to the words of Jesus about how we need to become like little children if we want to become part of the kingdom of heaven. So, to start our time of worship, we're going to listen to children reading from those words of Jesus. Thanks to Talia and Rian Jacob for sharing the Bible reading from Matthew 18 today.
Reading is taken from Matthew chapter 18 verses 1 to 5. Who is the greatest? At that time the disciples came to Jesus asking, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" So Jesus called a child to come and stand in front of him and said,
"I assure you that unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one who humbles himself and becomes like this child, and whoever welcomes in my name one such child as this welcomes me."
Unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven, says Jesus when the disciples asked him who was the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. I reckon those words would have seemed strange to the disciples back then. They certainly would have seemed strange to the church that I remember growing up in. The church that I grew up in tolerated children, but I don't think they thought we had faith in any way. My big memory as a child of sitting in church of this long prayer that seemed to go on forever and ever. And eventually I must have whispered something to the boy sitting next to me, and all of a sudden there was a big voice from the pulpit, "Will that boy in the front row please stop talking?" And I knew I was in big trouble. We were tolerated, expected to be there, but not act like children. Because I think they didn't really think that children could have faith and act like children. We certainly weren't allowed to take communion at that time. I was thinking about that because my mind changed about it. This painting, again by Chris's father, not that I'm showing you one of those every week, it's just that this painting of Chris and the two boys when they were young really brought back to me how the boys changed my mind about this as they grew up. Because from a very early age, they clearly had a simple but real faith. And they would pray. We found one of the earliest written prayers the other day as we were sorting things out. "Dear God, would you please help Mum to let me go to John's party?" A prayer from the heart from one of them. Fortunately, it succeeded. But the clear thing is that it seemed to me that they had faith. And when it came to the Uniting Church changing its mind and its practice about who could take communion so children were welcome at the table of the Lord, it was obvious that here was something that they could understand, relate to, and love to share in. Now, last Sunday on the Zoom morning tea, after we'd shared in communion, I asked, what was the most memorable communion you could remember sharing in? And I think the first one that came back was talking about how you'd gathered in a big circle, adults and children together, and you could see one another as you shared the bread and wine. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I remember. That's how we used to do it at Frankston at the contemporary service. We would serve one another, so adults would serve children, children would serve adults, together reaching out in simple faith to recognise the risen Jesus there in our midst as we shared the meal that he'd given for us. So the question is, how do we as adults become like children to be part of God's kingdom of love? Well, I think just as a child accepts and welcomes the love of their parents and doesn't try to explain it, So we're called to simply accept the love of God. Don't try and explain God. Don't try and justify God's love. Just as your parents loved you, so God loves you far more. So simply accept that, rejoice in it. And when it comes to prayer, you don't need special words or memorise certain prayers. Sometimes the prayers of other people are helpful, but most important is for you to simply say to God what's on your heart. What's worrying you? What are you rejoicing about? What do you want to give thanks for? They're the things we need to pray about, and pray simply in our own words. And then, just as our children need to listen as well as to speak, so we'll need to sit and listen to God, not just talk to God. That may not be easy or straightforward. If we're expecting a big voice from the sky, it rarely happens. But my experience and the experience of many Christians is that as we sit and be silent before God, very often it becomes clear, of course, that's the way we should go. This is what God is calling me to if I'm going to be a follower of Jesus and share his love. Does that sound too simple for you? I don't think so. It may sound simple, but most of us find it quite difficult too, don't we? So I think it is as simple and as difficult as that. So God bless each one of us as we, this week, try to be like children and accept God's love, rejoice in God's love, and share God's love. The peace of God be with us all, and also with you.